Hello, my name is Ben Kane, and I'd like to thank Mark for letting me be part of the reading of his Chronicles. I've known Mark going on 30 plus years, I believe, at this particular moment in time in our lives, and to be involved in this piece of work that what had to happen for these words to come out of his mouth and what he had to go through to get them written down and to get them out, to end up doing all of this so that he can end up helping someone else is a true testament to the artistry and the artist that Mark Southers is. So I'm honored to be reading part of the Chronicles. Thank you. Number 19, Fear of the Black Man. One of the things I did at the hospital and the rehab facility is that when I met a new nurse or nurse's aide for the first time, or if there was an administrator that came bedside, I'd ask them to come closer for an energy transfer. I'd grab hold of their right hand and I'd rub their left arm and the top of their hand vigorously with my left hand. Some are cold to the touch initially, and some are slightly warm, but eventually I'd warm them up. I do this with my guests as well, but with them, it's more of me thanking them for coming out. When the nurses or whoever are African American, it's like, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you, fam. But when they're white, it's a whole different ball game. You see, more times than not, most of these Caucasian nurses have not come in contact with an African American in an intimate setting to the point where their initial conversation is warm. They usually keep their distance for a while unless they find some similarities that draw them closer. It's my belief that it's the images from the 11 o'clock news and negative depictions of Black men and boys on TV and in the movies that permeates their mind and causes them to have an already formed opinion of Black men. When I first came off the high doses of narcotics and emerged out of my comatose state, I was really sensitive. I cried when close friends or family came into the room, much like I did when people that I admired showed up for my father's funeral, although I went downstairs at Jones's funeral home to let it all out. This time I was flat on my back, unable to barely move from all of the trauma that my body had endured. My very first visitor that I can remember after being conscious was my friend Eric Smith. I'm not sure what we talked about, but it certainly was a good feeling when he walked into the room. As other visitors appeared, I couldn't hold back my emotions, and I certainly wasn't able to escape to that basement to hide my tears. I laid there, flat on my back, holding onto their arm or hand, bawling my eyes out like a recently returned POW. You see, I was returning from a war where I had escaped death. I wasn't fighting for my country, but for my sanity and the opportunity to return unscathed to where my friends and family were. I'm thinking that my emotional state was turned all the way up on high because I was overcome with joy that I was still alive, and now I'm getting a chance to see my friends and family again. For in that dark place that I was for 5 solid weeks, I saw no one that loved me. A lot of times when Black folks complain or mention racial abuse, people both Black and white are quick to dismiss it as the one complaining is being oversensitive, or that the person who's dishing it out is really not a bad person and has Black friends. Well, that may be true, but I'm quite sure that at some point their Black friends let them slide with a little joke or negative comment here and there, which in turn allowed them to feel more comfortable and which gave them a false license to continue on. Another thing which allows this type of racial thinking to survive is the very culture we live in. If our young children, both Black and white, are watching TV, which is more likely serving as a babysitter, if they are glued to this device their entire young lives, then they are consistently bombarded with programming and commercials where Caucasians dominate the screen. Beat into their young minds that Santa and Jesus are always going to be white, just like at the mall or depicted in the stained glass windows at most churches. What message is this subconsciously going into our young Black boys' minds? That they are not part of this world? Speaking of Santa, I have a very good friend who's an older white man. Early in our friendship, he called me one day telling me that he had his Santa suit on and they had just finished visiting a group of kids at a local hospital or church. He was nearby and asked if he could stop by and surprise our two boys. I paused for a minute because it was a difficult position to be put in. But I told him, hey, man, I really appreciate the offer, but my wife and I just had them down at the AWC, getting their picture taken with an African-American Santa Claus. And I really think it would send a mixed message to them. He paused, momentarily not having much to say. It was a moment that caused us both to think about race and just how much our country is divided. I'll share with you some more of my experiences that were both slightly funny and really sad. When my daughter Ashley was 5, she wanted a puppy. My brothers, sister Joy, and I grew up with a dog in the house. I knew that from past experiences that a Labrador Retriever was a good, calm, loving dog for a child. So I located a kennel in the newspaper, and Ashley and I headed out to the country to look at some labs. We eventually arrived at a kennel. The dogs barked wildly as we pulled into the huge driveway. The owner came out and greeted us in between the shouts at his legion of dogs to shut up. I told him by phone that we were interested in a chocolate lab, so he was all prepared and escorted us to a long pen where the chocolate labs were. When he went to retrieve a few of the pups, the mother charged towards Ashley and I and went into a hysterical barking fit. I mean, it was way more convulsive than that band of Rockwilders in the movie The Omen. The two puppies that he brought out didn't seem to have an issue with us. They wagged their tails and friskily stumbled towards us. But my daughter, frightened by their aggressive mother, clung tightly to me, and all I could think was that her young mind was thinking, this is what you wanted me to have? The embarrassed breeder rushed towards this dog, trying to calm her down, but it wasn't to be. All bets were off. The dog continued to bark and growl viciously as we headed back towards our vehicle. The man caught up with us in the driveway. He said, hey, I'm sorry, folks. She's never acted like that before. I said, that's okay. I think we're going to have to look for a smaller breed. He said this next. I think the problem was she had never seen colored folks before. Exit stage right. I thought that was a crazy and odd situation. But when we finally ended up with our much smaller dog, a Jack Russell Terrier, affectionately known as Squirt, we named him Squirt because when he got excited, which was quite often, he'd tinkle a small bit here and there. A lot of people thought he was called Squirt because he was small. Well, Squirt was also born in the country. His initial name was actually Bubba. He was quite friendly during that drive from beyond the suburbs to Pittsburgh's Hill District. But strangely, I noticed over the weeks and months after his arrival that he was actually a racist dog. Now, let me explain. Whenever someone black, other than my family, was around, he'd go off on them, barking viciously. But when he was around white folks, including the mailman, he'd wag his tail like, please take me back to the country with you. We would drive through the Hill District with my windows down, pre-gentrification. This was back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Squirt would poke his head out of the window and bark at every single black person he saw. It wasn't until we got downtown Pittsburgh and he saw all the mostly Caucasian folks occupying the sidewalks and crossways. Then that's when he relaxed. I'm not joking. It's the truth. Well, eventually he grew out of that and became a great pet. Of course, it helped that we never allowed him to watch the 11 o'clock news. More recently, as a matter of fact, a few months ago, two good friends visited me. I won't mention their names because I think they were just as embarrassed as I was. I'll just say that they were a married couple devoted to making great art here in Pittsburgh. Anywho, they were visiting me at Montefiore Hospital in the select care section. Oh, and by the way, they are Caucasian, a very important aspect to this short story. So I'm lying there flat on my back. The two of them are sitting bedside when the Goodwill dog and the lady that takes her from room to room shows up. It was a mixed breed, and I was elated to see this dog because I'm a dog lover, and I had not been around pets for a while. So I asked the lady the dog's name, and then I whistled for the dog to come closer, saying its name. Here, Mary. Come here, Mary. The dog took one look at me, and for the rest of the time in the room, it held its head cocked hard to the left and refused to look my way or even acknowledge that I was there. It was very friendly with my guest, who could not believe what they were witnessing. At that point, my minimal self-diagnosed Tourette's syndrome jumped out of my throat and said to the lady, "Is your dog Mary racist?" All four of us were surprised by my question. The woman quickly went into defense mode of her dog and wanted to have a deeper discussion about race, which included her telling me that if she saw a black male with a hoodie on, she would cross the street. Anywho, it's all on video, but because it shows her face, out of respect for her job, I chose not to put it on Facebook. But this dog, she would not look at me or accept a petting of her fur. I was drugged as hell, but my prior experience kept me from being depressed about this whole situation. Now, I could go on and on about my experiences of people and animals, general fear of the black male, but I'll leave you with this last one. One Pittsburgh winter, I had parked on the roof of an outdoor garage. I entered the elevator and held the door for a 50-ish Caucasian woman who was just behind me. She stopped short of its doors and then made a right and elected to take the stairs. It was one of those moments that shook me. This woman chose to walk down 8 flights of steps in the bitter cold because of the color of my skin. I was drugged as hell. I once again hated my country all over again and all involved for causing me to have to experience this. The sad thing about it is that this will not end in my lifetime, and possibly not my children's. And I'll say this: the effects of 400 years of slavery in the United States will take many more centuries to unravel. But what gives me hope is, like the situation we found ourselves when 9/11 first happened. Americans drew together as one. Black Americans felt like they were Americans for real by the way we were treated by white Americans. Because now there was another enemy to point the finger at. Perhaps we could have some sort of government program where we have some sort of energy transfer so that we could all warm up to each other and accept one another as fellow Americans. Onward.